Her train left in half an hour. Kent was late. Rising from her seat, Gwen looked in every direction for some sign of him in the crowd. A hand raised in greeting, a glimpse of his blonde hair, anything that would mean she wasn't going home to see her parents by herself. But he was nowhere to be seen. So when her train's track was called over the loudspeaker, Gwen sighed, picked up her suitcase, and trudged off to board it, alone. As the train readied to leave the station, the platform was abuzz with activity. From her seat at the window, Gwen watched all the commotion. Porters pushed carts weighed down by dozens of bags. One had tipped, spilling its load, and several men were hurriedly restacking it. The conductor smiled broadly as he ushered passengers to their cars, periodically checking his watch to make sure they were on time for their scheduled departure. People said their goodbyes. Some shared a laugh and a wave. Young couples held each other in tender embraces, wanting their final moment together to last as long as it could. And some partings were sad, tearful farewells for a loved one's leaving. And I know just what that's like. 4 years ago, when Gwen had left Indiana to become a student at the Worthington Academy for Girls, a private school in Evanston, just outside Chicago, she had been heartbroken. Saying goodbye to her mother and father at the train depot had been the hardest thing she'd ever done. Wrapped tightly in her blankets as if they were a cocoon, she had cried herself to sleep every night for a week. It didn't matter that her parents had scrimped and saved to give her this opportunity, sending her away in the belief that it would lead to a better life for their only child. Gwen was convinced that her life was ruined. But then, things slowly began to change. Gwen thrived. She made friends, many of whom had been sent to the big city for the same reason, other girls just as lost and lonely as she was. In the classroom, she received high marks, studying literature, history, Latin, and mathematics. On the weekends, she took the train into the city to walk among the skyscraping buildings, marvel at all the people, gawk at the goods in the store windows, eat at nice restaurants, and occasionally go to a play or the movies. Gwen understood that a door had been opened for her, and even though she'd had to be forced through, once over the threshold, she didn't want to go back. Still looking out the window, Gwen caught sight of her reflection. When she was a child, she'd thought she looked plain, but now, at 19 years old, she could recognize some of the reasons men's heads turned when she walked down the sidewalk. Almond-shaped eyes, a piercing blue, as deep in color as a sapphire stone, curly dark hair long enough to drape across her shoulders, skin as smooth and unblemished as a spring apple, and a friendly smile that held within its curve just a hint of mischievousness. Gwen knew she was pretty, but it was a knowledge with which she wasn't entirely comfortable. Some of the other girls at school wore their beauty as if it was a badge of honor, flaunting it for all it was worth. Doing so meant they attracted plenty of attention, most of it from the opposite sex. Gwen had had her share of suitors, boys from nearby academies, as well as young men she'd met on her trips into the city. She had gone to a few movies, shared a milkshake or two, and even stolen a kiss here and there, but nothing had ever blossomed into something more. Until the day she met Kent Brookings. Speaking of whom, where was he? Gwen took another look up and down the platform, growing more convinced by the second that he wasn't going to make it. I swear, if I have to go by myself, there will be— Excuse me, miss, but is this seat taken? Gwen spun around to find Kent standing in the aisle. His smile was impeccable, like something you'd expect to see on a billboard over Michigan Avenue. His blue eyes practically sparkled. But the fact that his blonde hair was slightly mussed, his cheeks were flushed, and his chest rose and fell beneath his tailored suit and expensive tie meant that he'd had to run to catch the train. I was starting to think I'd be leaving without you, she admitted. Kent sat down beside her, leaned over, and placed a soft kiss on her forehead. I can't believe you doubted me. It wouldn't be the first time, Gwen said with a smirk. Only once or twice, surely. More like 6 or 7 times, she answered. There was the night I had tickets to see Oklahoma at the Biltmore Theater and ended up missing the whole first act waiting in the lobby. Then last year at Christmas when I made